Sometimes, the worst moment of your life can secretly become the beginning of your rescue. We often think we know what is best for ourselves, but life may be leading us towards something we cannot see. When everything seems to be falling apart, never lose hope, because what looks like the end may actually be the beginning of something better. Welcome to Moon Hollow Stories. I'm your host, Rashed. Leave the noise behind and take a moment to slow down. This story isn't just meant to inspire you, it's meant to stay with you long after it ends. Now, let's begin. Far away from the busy cities and crowded streets, there was a vast ocean surrounding many small islands. One morning, a young photographer named Daniel was traveling by boat towards a distant coastal town. He had spent the last few weeks traveling through different places, taking photographs of nature for a travel magazine. Daniel loved his work. He loved quiet beaches, beautiful mountains, and places where few people had ever been. That morning, the sea was calm, the sky was clear, and the boat moved smoothly across the water. Daniel stood near the edge of the boat, looking at the endless blue ocean. But by evening, everything suddenly changed. Dark clouds covered the sky. Strong winds began pushing the boat from side to side. Huge waves crashed against the boat, and the passengers began to panic. The captain tried desperately to control the boat, but the storm was too powerful. Then, suddenly, a terrible sound came from beneath them. The boat had struck something underwater. Within minutes, the boat began breaking apart. Daniel was thrown into the dark ocean. He desperately grabbed a piece of floating wood and tried to stay above the waves. Around him, people were shouting for help, but the storm quickly separated everyone. Daniel held on to the wood for as long as he could. Eventually, exhaustion took over. He lost consciousness. When Daniel finally opened his eyes, the sun was shining above him. He slowly lifted his head and looked around. He was lying on a strange beach. There were no houses, no roads, no people, only trees, rocks, sand, and the endless ocean. Daniel realized that he had somehow survived the shipwreck, but he was completely alone on a deserted island. He fell to his knees and prayed, "God, please help me. Please send someone to find me." He waited near the shore for hours, hoping to see a ship, but nothing appeared. The next morning, he prayed again, then again the following day. Days passed, but no one came. After several days, Daniel understood that he could not survive by simply waiting. He began searching the island for food and water. He found coconuts growing on the trees and learned how to catch small fish near the shore. He collected branches, leaves, and pieces of wood that had washed onto the beach. Using whatever he could find, Daniel built a small shelter beneath a group of trees. It was simple, but it protected him from the rain and the strong sunlight. He also managed to save a few things from the broken boat, including a small camera, a metal bottle, and some useful tools. Every evening, Daniel sat outside his shelter and looked toward the horizon. He hoped that one day he would see a rescue boat. Sometimes he prayed, sometimes he talked to himself, and sometimes he simply stared at the ocean in silence. Weeks passed. His clothes became dirty and torn. His body became weaker. Most importantly, his hope began to disappear. One afternoon, Daniel decided to make a fire near his shelter. He wanted to cook the fish he had caught and stay warm after sunset. He placed dry branches around the fire and walked toward the beach to collect more wood. He was gone only for a short time, but when he returned, he suddenly stopped. His shelter was on fire. Flames were rising into the sky. The dry leaves and wooden branches had caught fire, and the wind was spreading the flames quickly. Daniel rushed toward the shelter, but there was nothing he could do. Within minutes, everything he had built was gone. His shelter was destroyed, some of his belongings were burned. The little home that had given him hope was now nothing but ashes. Daniel stood there silently. Then, his sadness turned to anger. He looked toward the sky and shouted, "God, why are you doing this to me? I prayed for help every single day. I asked you to send someone to rescue me. Instead, you allowed me to lose the only shelter I had." His voice became weaker as tears filled his eyes. "I built that shelter so I could survive, and now even that is gone. Why didn't you answer my prayers?" Daniel continued complaining until the sun disappeared. That night, he had nowhere to sleep. He lay down on the cold beach and stared at the dark sky. Finally, exhausted and heartbroken, he whispered, "Maybe this is my fate." Then he closed his eyes and fell asleep. The next morning, Daniel was suddenly awakened by a loud sound. Honk! He opened his eyes and looked toward the ocean. For a moment, he thought he was dreaming. Then he heard it again. Honk! Daniel quickly stood up. Far away on the horizon, he saw a large rescue boat moving toward the island. His heart began beating faster. He could not believe his eyes. He ran toward the beach and started waving his hands. When the rescue team reached the beach, they immediately helped Daniel onto the boat. They gave him water and a blanket. Daniel was still trying to understand what had happened. Then he looked at the captain and asked, "How did you know I was here?" The captain smiled and said, "Yesterday, we were sailing several miles from this island when we saw a huge column of smoke rising into the sky. We knew that smoke could only come from a fire. We thought someone might be stranded here, so we came to investigate." Daniel suddenly became silent. He remembered the fire, his shelter, the flames, the smoke. Then he understood. The very fire he considered his greatest disaster had actually become the signal that saved his life. Daniel looked back toward the island with tears in his eyes. He whispered, "God, I thought you had abandoned me, but you were answering my prayer in a way I could not understand." Daniel finally realized that his plan was not the only plan. He wanted to stay safely inside his shelter until someone found him, but the shelter was hiding him. When it burned, the smoke became visible from far away. What Daniel believed was destruction had actually become his rescue signal. And maybe our lives are not so different. Sometimes we lose a job we desperately wanted. Sometimes a relationship ends. Sometimes a business fails. Sometimes a dream we worked years to achieve suddenly disappears. And in those moments, we ask, why is this happening to me? We only see the pain of the present moment. We do not see what may come next. When trouble enters our lives, our faith can become weak. Our patience can disappear. Hope can fade. And we may even think that God has forgotten us. But remember this, we can only see one small part of our journey. God sees the entire path. So when something does not go according to your plan, do not immediately believe that everything is over. Maybe the closed door is protecting you. Maybe the lost opportunity is making room for something better. Maybe the painful ending is preparing you for a new beginning. Keep doing your best. Keep moving forward. Keep praying. And most importantly, keep your faith alive. Because sometimes the very thing you are crying about today may become the reason you smile tomorrow. Daniel thought the fire had destroyed his only hope, but that same fire became the signal that brought his rescue. So, whenever life feels like it is going against you, remember this: your plan may be good, but God's plan can be greater. You may not understand what is happening today, but one day, when you look back, you may realize that what you called a disaster was actually the beginning of your rescue.